Hi, welcome to our podcast. I'm Mary Abazia, and with me is Tom Spitali and Sean Wellham. We're from Impact Planning Group, and we are always wrestling different topics. And one that just keeps coming to the top is risk. And risk comes in all different forms, and typically we hear that people are, fearful of it. And as we started to talk through it more, we think that there's a lot of opportunity or reframing the way that marketers think about risk. And so we're gonna talk through this, and hopefully you're gonna get some ideas for your business. Sean, do you want to take this a bit further?
Yeah, I guess the one thing that struck me is we're going through what feels like quite volatile times. We've got a war in mainland Europe with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've got energy prices, possibly as a consequence, or at least impacted by that, running out of control. We've got supply security issues for energy. We've got interest rates. We've got the economy on the brink. We've even seen sort of political risks in countries that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Over the past few years, we seem to have stepped into a more volatile world. Now, for a lot of us of a certain age, I won't give too much away about our birth dates, but we've seen these cycles of high risk through the 70s and the 80s and so forth. But feels fairly new. We got so used to cheap energy, cheap interest rates, stability, and all that's kind of fallen away in the past few years. So normally when people feel risk, they become risk adverse, they become risk managers, and we see companies wanting to manage risk. But also risk travels with its close companion opportunity. Volatility creates opportunity, and it's really that spin on risk that I thought we would try to explore and see, is risk something to be scared of or embraced, or somewhere in between, I guess, is the sort of way I wanted to frame this up anyway. I don't know what you guys think or what you want to add, but I'm trying to make risk a positive somewhat.
I think it's something to be embraced. It is an opportunity with the right tools, the right mindset to handle change better than the competition. I think, as you alluded to, Sean, change is more of a constant than ever. I mean, that sounds trite to say, but we've had a lot of situations in the past 10 years where we were helping people with planning and a limited time that we in windows that we have to help our clients with planning. A lot of times one of the processes that got cut was something that's typically at the very front of our planning process, which is, we call it planning assumptions or trends analysis. And we allowed that to happen for the sake of time, and probably because there was just a lot more stability in the world, as you mentioned, Sean. We can't do that anymore. We need to insist that our clients probably start their planning process with a set of planning assumptions or trend analysis, because the change is inevitable. But that whole process allows people to kind of think through maybe a broader set of circumstances than perhaps their competitors are. And it takes a little bit more time, but it allows them to really react quicker than the competition. It allows them to avoid the analysis paralysis that sometimes comes with a huge shock to the system, where people just don't know what to do for a while. And I think all of that is very positive, because in the end, it allows these companies to have a little bit more confidence that no matter what happens, they're ready. They at least have planned out a couple of steps that they'll take if a couple of these huge tidal wave type changes happen, or even smaller shocks to the system. They're ready to deal with it better than the competition in a more customer centric way. What do you think, Mary?
Yeah, I think if you don't have risk built into your strategy, it kind of sucks, or it's not robust enough, because it has to have it, especially given what we're talking about now. And Tom, I think you're right. We had talked a lot more about planning assumptions in the past, And it seems like we've been in business over 40 years, and so there's a time where it's more important and then it's less important. And I think we're back, as you're saying, and the wargaming or the scenario planning, so that companies walk out with what's our plan B and our plan C, because it's so uncertain that you need to have more than just a plan B. And companies that do that seem to really have a mindset for, okay, bring it on, it's changing, but we're ready for it. And we have our plans in place so that we can mobilize quickly. I think that that's really going to be a key to how these companies continue to have the right approach moving forward.
I mean, you can't predict the future, obviously, but it's about. I remember when we had the 2007 financial crisis, which seems a lifetime ago now, but it was probably the biggest shock we'd had in several years that reset that whole risk calibration, that shook us out of this comfort zone that we'd been in, that it was always going to get better. And in 2007, we worked for a large client, and their CEO said, and the phrase was, we have to get better at seeing around corners, seeing what's coming that isn't obvious. And that phrase always struck me as being, it was intended as being, we've got to not be caught out by something that adversely affects us. But also the ability to see around corners is to see what's coming, to build your offer and to create value for that new world. So sometimes risk also drives innovation, because you've got to be able to say, what is the opportunity that this is creating? And risk affects all of your customers. And anything in your offer that can mitigate that, that can be a solve to that, that can create some comfort, is more valuable. So stability and reputation and credibility, all these slightly boring positioning elements, can become really important when you're a supplier to people. That give me one less thing to worry about. I can trust you. You're a good supplier. Those things that aren't always the most exciting positioning elements can become more valuable as well.
Yeah, Sean, you said something interesting that I agree with. You can't predict the future. But what I found, and even in our own company experience, if you attempt to do it, right, and you make plans and you look at different scenarios that might play out, and you have an idea of what you might want to do, I think you actually get what some people would call lucky. You get lucky, but it's not really luck. Let me just say, we saw a trend a number of years ago where we felt that companies were going to want to do more of their training virtually. Makes sense, right? The technology for virtual training is getting better. Companies are less inclined to have employees travel around the globe as much to go to training sessions, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a lot of pressure towards finding ways to deliver virtually, even though it's hard to do that as well as a live training event. We all, I think, agree on that. And so we as a company decided that we needed to make some movements to be able to do what we do virtually better on the basis of that trend. In fact, that trend probably was not progressing as fast as we might have predicted. And we were developing these capabilities, and the uptake was not probably what we thought at the beginning. But guess what? A different trend happened. COVID came along. And all of a sudden, there was just absolutely no ability at all to deliver live training. And we were ready. We had our virtual capabilities ready. Not for the reason that we thought. We didn't predict COVID. I don't think anybody predicted COVID. But we were focused on a different trend that led us to take some actions. And it looked like maybe we got lucky, but we were drinking our own Kool-Aid. And not to pat ourselves on the back, but just to really be an advocate for this whole idea of trend planning assumptions, scenario planning, as a way to maybe ensure that you get lucky in the future.
You've got to, covering your bets, isn't it? You don't put everything on the roulette wheel on one number. You're covering you're spreading the bets, I guess, to put myself back in Vegas for a moment. But you've got to, I guess, to complete the phrase, when I say you can't predict the future, I always follow it by saying, but you can reduce your vulnerability to being surprised by it. And that's really what we're saying, is how can you spread those bets to reduce that vulnerability, and to think about and play that the biggest strategic question is always starts with what if. What if this happens? How do we react? What does that do to the market? And that sort of what if mindset also helps you with that, saying, what if this was to happen? Are we prepared for this? Or what if something was to fundamentally change the construct of our market? How do we best adapt? And sometimes you in your innovation work, you want to place some of those bets on the not very likely but hugely impactful. When we classify risks and trends, as many of the people who've worked with us will know, we put into a 4-blocker, and the top is highly likely and highly impactful trends. And then we have the less likely but highly impactful, or the very likely but less impactful. And finally, we have the not likely, not impactful. In those extremities, building potential products, or at least the groundwork for products that might come into play if something that not really expected but is impactful comes to pass, it can leave you ahead. And sometimes you have to speculate. And it's not all about building products for today's market. It's taking that little bit of a risk, manage that risk, but build for the future.
And Sean, I think it's beyond products. I think when you talk about it is about designing products and maybe different ways of delivering products. I think that's a huge part of it. But I think a lot of what we've seen with our clients is it's even goes to doing things like having ideas about alternative suppliers. We've seen in some of our clientele that the marketers have gotten saddled with supply strategy to a certain extent, right? And they spend a lot of time, and they got caught, I think, in a lot of situations with too few options in supply, and just no real idea in a case of limited supply who of their customer base gets the stuff and who doesn't, which is a difficult decision, excruciating decision to have to make, but nonetheless becomes very important for the long-term future of your company, that you pick the right customers to get the stuff in a limited situation. So I think it's beyond products. I think it's alternative supply in some situations. It's alternative, services or methods of the entire, how you deliver the entire customer experience that you have to think through in certain extreme scenarios, like you're talking about, that low probability but high impact situation, for example.
Yeah, I think that I like what you guys are saying, and I think having a structure for that thinking is really critical. That's why I really like the way that the scenario planning or the wargaming that we've done in the past has really helped companies. We were working with a dental supply company, and they did exactly what you're saying, Sean. They said, what if, and they went through, they knew that things were changing, not only in the environment, but what did that pressure have on the customers, but then also on the competitors. And when they walked out of there, they realized that there's things they could do with the customer, but one of the big plan B and plan C's is that the competitors were even being pushed to some new situations that created opportunities for them. And they ended up partnering with somebody that they wouldn't have never originally thought of. So the what ifs need to be broad. And what if this happens, what happens to the customer, what happens to the competitor, what happens to the supply chain? And it's kind of cool. I mean, as a marketer, you can really start to play with the variables and say, okay, what is this really going to mean for us? And where do we have to minimize or mitigate risk? But where can we double down in a couple of areas and take advantage of these changes that are happening?
I totally agree. And it just occurs to me, it's not, we're obviously big advocates of thinking over the horizon, of saying what if, but that's really important stuff. But there's also an agility that's needed, isn't there? That when something does happen, that rather than go into any sort of panic mode or denial mode of saying, let's just carry on as we are. If you're in marketing, the first thing when something happens is try and establish the consequence of that thing, whether it's a financial crash, a recession, a political insurrection, a war, a virus. Whatever happens, look at your market, look at your customers.
Sean, as you were saying, I'm like, yep, 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 yep. It's like a bad novel. It's like we do have all of those things right now happening.
They're all
Thanks,
happening
Sean.
right now. I feel like I'm one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse even saying this. But you look at all those things. Yeah, you don't normally say them all in one breath, do you? It is terrifying when you do that. But if we believe that every volatility creates opportunity because it shakes the foundations, it changes the status quo, it shakes complacency, then a good marketer should embrace it and go, okay, so now for us, for our product, for our customers, for their customers, for this whole network, this whole ecosystem that I'm involved in, where does the stress hit? Where does the opportunity change? And be fleet of foot, be quick in how you move. So while you plan ahead and you build ahead and you anticipate, also be prepared to react. Because I think the other thing is people that react the quickest sometimes get the benefit too. So yeah, there's a ton. We said this might be interesting. I think there's a ton of stuff to talk about in terms of risk and volatility and innovation marketing and tying those together.
I think there's a certain mindset too that is important here. And I almost hate to say it, but I'm going to say it because it's the truth. This risk mindset, this trend planning assumptions kind of mindset, you got to spend a little time thinking about stuff that's not going to happen. You know, I mean, it's no way to avoid it. To be broad enough to consider, the things that can happen. You're gonna spend time on plans that are, at least rudimentary plans, right? What are we going to do first and second if this happens? You're going to spend some time on stuff that's not going to happen. But I think, like I said earlier, it ends up being worthwhile because just the process and the act of doing it, and you don't have to spend huge amounts of time. I mean, with frameworks and some of the tools that we have and that we've been talking about, you can do these things fairly efficiently. Spend a couple of days, day and a half, day sometimes, just kind of thinking through all of this. It increases your odds of success because one of those scenarios or something like that's going to happen, you're going to be ready.
Yeah, I agree. And you have to have people that maybe you don't always have as part of that conversation. Maybe there's somebody that you don't always like the way they talk about the way the world's going, but you need their perspective, especially when you're having that initial conversation about what if. They're the person that might open your eyes to some things. So invite in people that you think maybe thinks different than you to have those discussions. We hope that you took at least one thing from this for your business, and we look forward to talking about risk with you more. Thanks.
Thank you.